In TV, there have been many weird and wacky shows. However, I want to talk about something not really known in the Western world. And that's a show from 2000 known as
Ikebukuro, Westgate Park, IWGP.
The basic plot of the show is it follows a guy named Makoto who is around 20 years old and a former delinquent who ends up trying to find out who killed a friend. The best way to show the show is the pilot episode. The show's opening scene is of the main character. Well, you can kind of see what he's doing. It then cuts to a woman taking a shower in which she is murdered. Now immediately it's obvious that the show is quite 90s, from the edginess, which is mostly due to the camera work. However, it all really helps give the show a unique look, as one of the best things the show does is its visuals and use of space and the camera. And like any great show, the show's opening scenes just get the audience used to the characters and what they get up to, from the scamming businessmen to bowling, introducing us to Makoto's best friend Masa, their friend Kaori, who alongside Masa works at the bowling alley, and eventually the G-Boys, a gang who essentially controls the Ikebukuro Westgate Park area, in which we see them beating up a few people and meet their leader.
3ミリ、6ミリ、9ミリ。は？はい、3ミリね。
The G-Boys come to the bowling alley, in which they threaten Masa and Makoto to let them play until the leader introduces himself to both of them.
ここまで。マコちゃん、久しぶり。
何、知り合い？
キング？殿様って意味じゃないよ。キング牧師のキング。
Another thing the pilot does very well is show the show's themes. For example, in this episode, it calls out the police for essentially being useless, which is a key theme throughout the entire show, with the first police officer we see being entirely scared and a pervert, and establishing the characters and what they are like in any good pilot, from Makoto's mother who acts like a teenager to Yamai, a man who Takashi fights, in which it's made very obvious he's dangerous even despite losing his fight. And speaking of the fight scenes, it's pretty obvious that the show is a comedy, from the overacting to the goofy fights, which in a scene later on in the series, a fight scene is shown in a much more serious tone. They overact so much it's probably one of the closest things to a live action anime, from his mother who seems straight out of an anime. To the reactions to things, to the police guy Hamaguchi, who is a pervert, which is in most if not all anime. Later on, one of the two girls, what we see in the start of the episode, is murdered by the quote-unquote strangler, a serial killer in Ikebukuro, who preys on young women by strangling them to death. And after that, we meet the police officer again, this time Yoshioka, the police chief, who it's obvious has feelings for Makoto's mum, while Hamaguchi, the character we saw earlier, is still being perverted. Later on, Makoto and Masa are hanging out, where they meet a guy named Shun, who seems to be about 15 or 16, who shows them his detailed drawings, of which they are of a sexual and disturbing nature. He's basically like a real-life edgy anime character, so much so they even call him that later on in the show, which annoys him. It's here where we meet two very important and vital characters, those being Rika and Hikaru. Shun draws a portrait of them, the girls then hanging out with Makoto and Masa and Shun, helping them in their bowling scam. In which we meet Ken Watanabe in probably one of the show's funniest scenes, where he challenges Makoto to a game of bowling, which Makoto is an expert in which he immediately hits the gutter for freeing up his car. Eventually Makoto teases him and leading him to steal a bike which has a flat tyre. For a good segment of the episode, it shows the characters all finding something to do in a day, from going to a farm, stealing a locker and returning the locker, Shun even stealing the Ikebukuro statue, which he has to put back, and them doing this while going past Hamaguchi, the police officer from earlier. They eventually go to the cafe, which is basically the hangout spot alongside the bowling alley for the series. Think of Seinfeld with its diner booth. In that diner, which we see all the main characters hanging out alongside the king and the G-Boys, with his girlfriend Jessie, who turns out can speak Russian and is about 10 years older than the king. We see the aftermath of the king's fight with Yamai, who's now all bruised up. Makoto is in the bathhouse with Takashi, in which he talks about the strangler, resulting in a new police chief coming to Ikebukuro. Now, the episode makes it very obvious that Hikaru is very jealous of Makoto's relationship with Rika, in which they eventually become boyfriend and girlfriend, so much so when it's revealed that Hikaru is very rich and has been giving everybody gifts, Makoto stops her from doing so. Later on we see this scene in which Makoto and Rika run away from everybody in order to get some alone time in a love hotel, in which we get this great shot, as it's never really elaborated who these guys are, but it's a very nice touch. Makoto and Rika are in the love hotel, and in this scene with Rika, he appears to be scared to have sex. This is established quite early on in the series, the fact that Makoto is quite bad with a woman. Just take how he treats his mum, for example, and stating what he really feels, in which he never is really able to say what he means, thus people distance themselves from him. Makoto eventually, while opting out of sex, does offer Rika a keychain, which she loves, and in the love hotel that Makoto and Rika are at, the Strangler has another victim, which does survive but still a victim nonetheless, in which Yoshioka, who sees himself as Makoto's dad, catches him and Rika in a comedic scene.
お隣のお客さんなんですが。
早く言えば。
Makoto being questioned for the murder due to not hearing or seeing anything, but is let go, and Hikaru grows much more jealous of Makoto, eventually kissing him, and when he tries to meet up with Rika. Rika meets up with the Strangler, in which she is eventually murdered, which Makoto is called, and eventually he meets the police chief. Makoto is again taken in for question for being the prime suspect of Rika's murder, making him the #1 suspect, and making it obvious Yokohama, Ken Watanabe, doesn't trust him at all. It's here where Makoto rages, kicking out at people, breaking furniture, hitting people, and being totally uncooperative. So much so he needs to be punched and warned with the photos of the crimes he's already committed throughout the episode. But then he states he will find Rika's killer before everybody else. And that's how the pilot ends. Sorry for that long-winded, essentially a recap of the TA episode, but I do think it's important in establishing what type of show it is, as the show can switch like that, going from this to this to this, all in the same episode. I think the best example of this craziness is Kana, who is a woman who eventually volunteers to work in Makoto and his mum's fruit shop, in which, after a while, it's obvious she has feelings for Makoto, despite him being in a relationship with Hikaru, and eventually she kisses him. In the next episode, it's revealed she has quit her job and works as a nursery school teacher. Makoto, who feels responsible, hunts her down and asks if it's his fault, which she says it wasn't. Eventually, Makoto asks his friend to try and find her, and eventually Makoto figures out where she is, and once he opens the door, yeah, so yeah, the show is pretty weird. However, it works. One of the biggest reasons I think it does work is the still and cinematography. The show has plenty of shots which it uses the full frame to its advantage. Whether it's in these scenes in which someone looks directly into the camera, or when there is something else in frame, like this shot in the first episode in which it's very clear of Hikaru's jealousy of Makoto, or just the long panning shots that, while simple, were very effective. And the style of the show is really helped from the clothes which the characters wear. Obviously the G-boys with their yellow attire, alongside Jessie, has a much more goth emo look. Then there's of course later on the rival gang, the Black Angels, which straight up wear black, and their leader wearing quite dark clothes but almost fancy clothing as well, to Makoto's baggy clothes. Even just Yamaguchi's clothes really do add to the feel of the show. So much so, the anime adaptation that would happen 20 years later just looked very generic and unappealing. While the TV show's obviously hip-hop inspired attire, which even in the music is very obvious, gives it a very unique look.
Check this out.
Now another key theme or idea in the show is about characters being lost or living double lives. Throughout the show, there are many characters like this, obviously Kana, but there's Rika, who is revealed to be a prostitute, to Yokohama, aka Ken Watanabe, who is revealed as being forced to be bribed by Yakuza member who are threatening his wife who has been in hospital for many years. To Shun, who while seems to be one of the show's more moral characters, it seems in episode 9 and 8 something's off. Eventually, Shun by episode 9 calling Yokohama scared, and by the end of the episode, it eventually being revealed the same person who stabbed Kana being Shun himself, even Makoto being stabbed in the next episode. This feeling of people living double lives is really helped in an episode in which Makoto and Shun sneak into a pyramid scheme of which Makoto's mother is involved in which they do sneak in, and eventually she gives a speech which really shows despite her constant arguing with Makoto, she really does care for Makoto.
これからも二人三脚でやっていこうじゃないか。
The speech really touching Makoto, so much so he starts to cry and makes the audience applaud alongside him. The biggest example of this is when the Strangler killer is revealed. Hikaru throughout the show was seemingly stalked by Yamai, even eventually meeting him multiple times throughout the series. However, it is revealed in fact that the killer was
疲れてるからさ。ごめん。
私リカを殺したの。
It's in the show's penultimate episode in which we find that Hikaru is in fact has multiple personalities, and that by the end she reveals herself to Makoto, and in the next episode he has got her to allow him to film a confession video in which she admits everything, to faking being stalked, to forcing Shun to stab Kana, to forcing Yumai to become the Strangler. Result of her father's abuse, of which it's never stated what type of abuse it was, but given the show's topic and themes it's pretty obvious what it was. And the theme of people being lost, you'll notice Makoto in some way or another helps people. He helps Kana despite her knocking him out, he helps Hikaru despite her mental health issues, he helps Chiaki, a prostitute, whose boyfriend is an illegal immigrant, of course he helps his mother every day in the shop, and he helps Yokohama stop the gang war between the Black Angels and the G-Boys, even allowing himself to get beat up by the king aka Takashi. And the main point of the show's finale being the pointlessness of violence that is occurring and the fact that it has no reasoning once everything is explained to each of the main characters. Now at the time the show in Japan was a massive and cultural significant show, launching the career of most of the main cast besides the already big Ken Watanabe, who alongside the actress for Kana would star in The Last Samurai, which garnered Ken Watanabe international fame and an Oscar nomination. And it was quite different from the normal Japanese TV, from which I can gather, as it was much more edgy and violent, tackling the much more extreme and sensitive issues like intriguing the police and Japanese society. So overall, I think that the show should definitely be checked out. It's weird, funny, and at the same time cool. It's like no other show I've seen due to the acting, the creativity, and I would definitely check it out. Even if it's just a pilot, which while weird, should hook you in. Abuse.